Thank you. Welcome everyone to the iHemp Hour, hosted by iHemp Michigan and MITech News. iHemp Michigan is dedicated to educate, inform, and promote the research, development, and cultivation of industrial hemp in Michigan. iHemp Michigan advocates for wellness in people and the planet through hemp, and it begins with the farmer. So let's start out with Mike Brennan from MITech News and the Marijuana Report. Mike?
Thanks very much, Dave. Yeah, so we're producing this show. Then when we're done, not only does iHemp Michigan share it with their audience, but we share it with ours. And we have about 20,000 or so people in social media between my two websites, which is MITech News, my primary one. And then we also do MIMarijuanaReport.com, which not only does it feature hemp, but also cannabis. And as you know, that business is booming right now during the pandemic. People have time on their hands, right? So we hope to have a great show for you today, and I'm going to turn this over to Blaine Bechtold, and he's going to introduce our guest and also talk about his cookie recipe. But first, I guess there's some great news coming from the USDA, right?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. A couple things I want to update everybody on. One is that today I'm probably going to jump off just a little early myself on this call today. Because there's USDA is having a Zoom webinar regarding Corona Food Assistance Program. And so there's not a lot of details out on it yet. Hopefully they'll have a few more on there. This is going to be for farmers and for hemp farmers as well. One thing I'm going to make a note that if you haven't had any contact at all with your local farm service agency office, usually every county has one. When you get above Grand Rapids and Muskegon, sometimes they combine them, but there's some things you can do ahead of time to be ready for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But the main thing right now that they're looking at is that it will provide direct, they call it CFAP, Corona Food Assistance Program, will provide direct support based on actual losses for agricultural producers where prices and market supply chains have been impacted. CFAP will assist producers with additional adjustments in the marketing costs resulting from lost demand and short-term oversupply for the 2020 marketing year caused by the COVID-19. So USDA evaluate commodity-specific losses occurring during the January to April timeframe for immediate assistance. In addition, near-term adjustment costs and supply disruptions over the next few months were also evaluated to extend possible sectors where prices have declined significantly for additional services. So CFAP is available to farmers regardless of size and market outlet if they suffered an eligible loss. We know that the disruption to markets and demand is significant, and these payments will only cover a portion of the impacts on farmers and ranchers. There's $19 million in this program, $19 billion in this program. So anyways, I'll have more of an update when I watch the webinar today. Maybe we'll put something out to the members on that. But stay tuned for this because this is another way that farmers will get assistance, and including hemp farmers in this situation as well. The other thing I want to make you aware of is that we all need to go to a US Hemp Roundtable, and we'll put the website up for that in a little bit, or I'll have it on there. Right now, there's some bills that are being introduced to the House, and then it's going to go to the Senate, and it's for one is the Safe Banking Act. And it sounds like from Jonathan Miller from US Hemp Roundtable last night that the House is not the problem. We'll get the approval on this for the House, but the Senate may be the issue on this Safe Banking Act. A lot of it has to do with the concerns about marijuana and all those things, but what we need to do is we need to go to the site. They have it real quickly. You can go and put your zip code in. It gets your senators, and it'll send a kind of a pre-canned announcement to them saying, please support. They asked us to put our own turnouts in there, our own things that we've had. You know, iHemp Michigan ourselves, we had a hard time even finding a bank that would take our money, and we don't even grow hemp, but we finally did. So we're still having those issues and credit card things, and so this will help. If we can get this passed, this will help make the bankers feel a little more easy. Even though they've been told it's not a problem to do this, it still seems to be a problem for hemp, excuse me, for hemp producers to be able to get some financial assistance that they need. So that's the good news and all that stuff. And now for today's recipe. Now, I didn't get a chance to make these yet, but I'm going to. And next week, I've got, give you the prelude for next week, a little teaser, blueberry hemp crumble bars.
Ooh.
There's also a smoked salmon that I'm going to put up there, the recipe for hemp on those. So we'll have them for next week. But this is a chia hemp seed oatmeal cookies. It takes about 20 minutes to prep time and 10 minutes to cook. And you use a 1 1/3 cup multi-grain flour. I was going to use almond flour today when I cook them. And 1½ cups of oatmeal and about 3/4 cups of coconut, 1/4 cup of chia seeds, 1/2 cup of hemp seeds, 1/2 cup of dark chocolate or raisins. I was going to use raisins in mine. 1/2 teaspoon baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of butter at room temperature, a cup of brown sugar, 1 egg, and they say vanilla bean or seed scraped out, or 1 tablespoon vanilla extract. And pretty much mix it all together, put it on the thing, 350 for about 10 to 12 minutes, and ought to be some yummy cookies there. So.
All right, and all these, thank you, Blaine. These recipes would be posted on the iHemp Michigan website, so don't worry about taking notes. We'll have those linked up where you can find them and the details on that.
Yeah. So it is my pleasure now to introduce Gina, and then also Senator Lauwers, I think, is going to be coming in. And Gina's going to help explain all the rules that we have for this year and where we're going with the application for the USDA. And so I won't steal any of her thunder. I'll let her fill all that in. So thanks, Gina, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here, Blaine. If I can, is Senator Lauwers on the call yet?
I do not see him coming in. He's not here yet.
Okay. All right, because I'm happy to yield the floor to him when he does join in. But in the meantime, what I'll do is just kind of give a high-level overview of USDA's interim final rules. And I'm going to try to present this in such a way that helps everybody understand really what the key differences are going to be as it relates to your operations. So at a super high level, the final rules have really 7 broad areas of requirements. And these broad areas, some of them are specific to the Department of Agriculture, and you guys won't even have to worry about it. Others are going to impact growers. So those 7 are, let me go through those real quick. Number 1, we need to be able to tell the feds who's growing hemp and where they're growing it, okay? So I'll get into this in more detail in a minute. Number 1, they're going to want to make sure that we've got inspections in mind to ensure compliance. Number 3, we need to make sure we've got effective sampling and testing procedures to ensure that only compliant hemp is being grown. The 4th broad area is effective disposal when we find that we have non-compliant hemp. Number 5, they're going to want to make sure we've got enforcement procedures in our law and in our hemp plan. We have to present or collect and report specific information to the feds. That's number 6. And then the last broad area is we have to be able to certify to USDA that we have the resources necessary to carry out our hemp plan. So that's at a super high level. So let me drill down a little bit deeper now into each of these so that you understand really what the big differences are going to be once we are operating completely under an approved hemp plan. So who's growing it and where? Now, everybody who's been licensed in the past knows that they have to present or provide specific information on their applications. And that information goes so far as to even require GPS coordinates for the properties that you're planning on growing your hemp. So one additional requirement to that is that in addition to the address, the maps, the GPS coordinates that you're providing, you're also going to have to provide a legal description of your growing areas. And some people might not always have that readily handy, so you're going to need to be prepared to present that information. You can typically find it on a property deed or plat books if you can still get your hands on those. But that's going to be something new that will begin in 2021. Also in that same area, growers are going to have to report their acreage to USDA's Farm Service Agency. So that's a new requirement. You haven't had to do that at all as part of the pilot program, but come the 2021 season, right after you get your grower registration, you're going to be required to report your acreage to FSA, and we'll provide instructions for how to do that. I'm sure the feds are going to make that easy for you, either by doing it online or maybe even going into a local office. I'm sure a lot of the growers are very familiar with those offices and those staff and should be able to get assistance if needed to be able to report their acreage. So the take home for that particular area is, number one, a grower registration is still going to need to be required. There will be a fee for it. The license year is going to remain the same. It will be 1 year, running from December 1st through November 30th. You got to have that legal description of your property, so be prepared for that. The background check process is still in place, and I'm going to cover that in a minute. And then just get acquainted with USDA's Farm Service Agency and how you'll report that, that requirement on your acreage. So that's the first area. Number two, inspections to ensure compliance. The feds are going to be looking for a commitment from MDARD that we're going to perform at least a random number of inspections. The division that will be doing those inspections is MDARD's Pesticide and Plant Pest Management Division. Some growers out there are likely very familiar with that staff because that's the same group of staff that regulates pesticide use, that regulates fertilizer, commercial feed products, that does nursery inspections, etc. So on an annual basis, that particular division does workload planning. They'll determine how many inspections they're going to do for a given year. That will be assigned to specific inspectors who have work areas identified for them, and then they'll come out and do an inspection. And the take home, I guess, for that particular area is that the inspections are going to be either routine or could possibly be complaint driven if that's something that we need to follow up on, some sort of a alleged violation. It will involve us looking at the premises. It will involve reviewing records, collecting samples if necessary. Those are pretty basic components of any regulatory inspection that we would do for any of our programs. Another take home to this point is that, you know, clearly we're not going to be able to inspect every grower every year. So I guess don't think it's unusual if you don't see us in a given year. Certainly we'll have to establish some sort of a schedule so that we are visiting every grower, at least with some frequency, but that will all be determined down the road. It's common with all of our regulatory programs that we're not able to get to every licensee every year. So that's the second area. The third area is one of the bigger components of the rule, and it's related to sampling and testing. So I'm going to break this down into two different parts. Let's start with sampling. So the rules go into detail to describe that we have to collect from the floral material of the plant, that we have to make sure that the sample is a homogeneous composition of the lot that we're sampling. The grower or his or her representative needs to be present when we're out there taking samples. We have to be given unrestricted access to the area where hemp is being grown, and no hemp should be harvested prior to MDARD coming out and taking the sample. So if you were listening closely, one key take home for that now is that growers will no longer be allowed to submit their own samples. You did that in 2019, you're going to do that in 2020 up until October 31st, which is the compliance date for the interim final rules. So come the 2021 growing season, primarily, growers will not be able to submit their own sample. The law is going to have specifics in it in terms of how much notice you have to give the department before you want your sampling done. It says that we have to come out and actually collect samples within a certain amount of time. And then, as you all know already, your harvest then has to occur within 15 days of receiving your test results. So the take home is that you really have to pay attention to your plans for harvest, because you need to figure out what that harvest date is going to be, or come very close to it, so that you can back up from there and be in compliance with the time frames for calling us to come out and get a sample, for us running that sample and getting the results back to you within a reasonable amount of time, and then for you to harvest within 15 days. So that's going to be, there's going to be a lot of responsibility there for growers to pay attention to that. Another way to say it is, don't call us for a sample on Monday if you're wanting to harvest on Thursday of the same week. Common sense.
Gina, just to clear up too, this testing that you're talking about, will that take place this year, or that'll be for the 2021 year?
It's not going to be in 2020, with the exception of any sampling that might be necessary come really November 1st. On October 31st of 20, that's when everything changes. That's when we need to be in compliance with the federal rules, which means growers cannot submit samples on their own come November 1st. We have to come out and do that. So one take-home message might be is get your samples in this year before October 31st. Otherwise, somebody from MDARD is going to come out and take them. So keep that in mind. But this is all primarily going to be for the 2021 season is what I'm talking about now, because, timing-wise, that's the end of our growing season. And things will pick up again the following year. Okay, where was I at here? So let me talk about testing. So we're covered sampling, testing. I don't think you guys are going to see a lot of change with the actual testing, and the reason for that is because we're already doing a lot of what's required by the federal rules. The feds are going to require total THC, which is what we did in 2019. That's what we're going to do in 2020. So we're in shape there. We're going to continue to use that 0.3% on a dry weight basis. That hasn't changed. We have to use DEA registered labs. That's a new requirement from the feds. However, MDARD's lab is DEA registered. So we're in good shape there. We don't really need to worry about that. And then the last key change is that the rules require that we identify a measure of uncertainty with the testing results. So that's basically a margin of error that is calculated based on the equipment that the lab is using, based on those procedures. And then, hang on a second. Then, those were on mute. Then, okay, I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. The testing will.
We're talking about DEA testing labs. You're approved and.
Right. So yeah, that's the biggest thing. Our lab is going to be what we've done in the law, the draft of our law changes. We've identified that MDARD's lab will be the primary regulatory lab, but that we can contract with other labs if necessary. So that's in there, that component is in there. That's something that we did hear from industry, concerns about our lab being able to manage that workload and what if something happens. So we do have a mechanism in place where we will be able to contract with other labs if need be. So those are the take homes really with sampling and testing. Again, the biggest ones is MDARD or our designees are gonna be the ones coming out to take the samples. We'll report a measure of uncertainty. We'll take that into consideration and report that in your results. And the rest of it is, pretty much the same as what we've done this year and last year and this year. Fourth broad area, is effective disposal if your hemp is not compliant. And for most of you who've read the law, you know that there was really very little, if anything, in the law that talked about what effective disposal is or what it looks like. So what we've done in the draft is we've actually identified specific means of disposal, where, and these would be means that are common to agriculture. So things like, let me get my notes here, plowing under, mulching or disking, composting, blending with other biomass, mowing, shredding, deep burial, burning. Those will all be disposal means that will be allowed in the law. And so that will be obviously much easier than requiring somebody to actually come to your location and take that hemp away. So it'll just be left in place using those typical agricultural methods. There will be some reporting requirements for disposal. It'll be reporting for the grower as well as the department, and those instructions will be provided if that need does arrive to actually dispose of plants. So the take home is that anything that exceeds 0.3%, taking into consideration that measure of uncertainty, there's no other option except for disposal. And that disposal will basically then render that crop irretrievable, non-ingestible. We're not going to be able to do anything else with it, unfortunately. But that's how the rules read at this time.
Gina, do you know that measure of uncertainty, what that percent might be?
I don't have that information. That's something that our laboratory director and his team will determine. He had tossed around some ideas early on, but I don't know where they've landed with that number. Again, it's based on the equipment that they're using. It's based on the procedures that they're using. So I don't know that offhand, Dave.
Okay.
Okay.
So the short version of that is going to be, okay, so if there's a, let's say there's a 3% margin there that they can use. So it could be anywhere from 0.33 to 0.27 and be in the compliance is what they mean by that. Correct?
So you're thinking 0.03% or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
we can talk to Craig and verify that.
But I just want to make
Just
that
so you know,
everybody understand
Gina,
this.
Senator Lauwers is on the phone, so he is queued
Okay.
up.
Okay.
All right, well, let's go to him, and everybody, you know, put your questions in there, and we'll get to those. And Gina, I've got a number of questions to come back and ask you after we get done with Senator Lauwers. So.
Okay, that's fine.
Senator, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being on. And I'll start out by thanking Gina and all the people at the department for their tireless work on this to get us all in shape and in compliance. Really, all I wanted to address was, a procedure for getting the law passed and updated. And that really comes down to with the requirements for social distancing and the limited work schedule that committee time that we're able to get in the legislature right now. We're going to do, our plan is to get the bill discharged from the Agricultural Committee without hearing, so directly to the floor. So, and I'm pretty confident we can do that. The chairman has indicated a willingness to do that. And, really what we're trying to do here is comply with the federal standards. And Gina's been doing a good job of making sure we've got those bases covered. So assuming we don't run into any contention or problems there, the plan would be to discharge to the floor, move it out of the House, send it to the other chamber. We will be working with the chairman, Alessandri, over there as well to try to do the exact same thing. This is not the kind of legislation that, that probably takes the amount of committee hearing input, because that really has been going on, through the work groups and through Gina's work. So hopefully that it goes without a hitch, and we can get this done in time. And that's our reason for trying to expedite without a full committee hearing process. If there are questions, we can answer them, but that's really what I have. And again, thanks everyone in the department for your good work.
Senator Lauwers, what's that bill number again? Could you give us that?
Jill, are you on? You can give them. I lose track of bill numbers. There's actually two. I don't know if Jill's on or she's muted or not.
I will look for Jill. No.
If not, we will get that information up so everybody.
Yeah.
Oh,
She's holding up
Gina's holding up a thing there. Gina, so
Senate
Senate
Bill
Bill number 850. Okay.
Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, Gina. All right, so everybody can, the nice thing there is if you need to or want to, you can go on, you can do a search for that, click on it, and that'll have all the information of that bill there. So, and Senator Lauwers, we thank you for all the work you've done with getting this to this point and continuing to work on this. A lot of people don't realize all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes just to make this happen. And I do want to give a shout out to Gina and MDART for the great job that they did last year, getting this program available that we could grow this year. That was quite a feat, and I'm glad that we were able to do that. So
Yeah, Senator Lauwers, thanks again. I just want to interject here. Our very first event, January 26th of 2019, you spoke at our event, and I remember clearly that in your mind, there wasn't a reason for even all this regulation for industrial hemp. Do you see a path to that in the future where this is just another agricultural crop?
I do. I think that as people become more familiar with hemp, the purpose of it, and you know, the intent, and then especially with the processing, you know, with processors really taking the THC level to zero for use to make the hemp the most usable. I think over time we will see people come to an understanding where they realize that hemp and marijuana are two different products, and the need to ensure that we're not growing marijuana when we're trying to grow hemp, you know, can be understood, and all this additional regulatory, you know, could certainly be loosened up to maybe where all we have is spot checks to ensure some level of assurance that, you know, we're not growing two different products there. So I think it'll come, but it's going to be a matter of time before society, I guess, becomes comfortable with the notion of the difference between the two crops, really.
Yeah, matter of education. Yep.
Yep, I think so. And you know, other staff also, you know, Jill in my office, Nathan Clark, they've all worked hard on this and done a great job, and especially given the challenges of distant working or working from home, everyone's really kept this ball moving. So I appreciate that.
is there any assistance or help that our growers or hemp enthusiasts, either manufacturers or processors, can do to help move the bill through or to encourage the passage of it? Anything we can do there to help?
Yeah, I think, you know, contacting your representatives and your senators for your areas, letting them know that, you know, this is a law to bring Michigan in compliance with the Fed so that we can continue our production. You know, and it's really technical in nature, so, you know, let them know there's full support for it is always good.
Okay, we'll see if we can get that word out and make an easy way to do that. All right. So again, if you have questions, if you know how to use the chat, go ahead and use the chat, put them in there. We'll get those answered. Let's see. So Jeremy asked for the 0.3. Does that mean 0.3, or is this a number rounded up, such as anything greater than the 0.35 roundups? I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Maybe Gina can. I know last year the state was very gave us a benefit of a doubt on that, and that's going to happen again until October of the 31st of this year, and then the new rules will come into play. So I don't know if that answers the question or not for you, Jeremy, or maybe Gina, you can answer that better.
Yeah, we definitely did do the rounding in 2019. That will continue in 2020. Come the 2021 season, we'll have to look at, you know, what we'll be incorporating is that measure of uncertainty, and that's the extent of any variances in the actual compliance numbers that'll be allowed. Okay.
This is really an opportunity for anyone that's interested in growing hemp. This is our final research year. yeah, I really encourage everyone to get out there, and it's only $100 for a grower application to grow hemp, to get out there and learn about it and make it happen.
So I'll go back to Gina just for some questions that I have. So we talked a little bit about disposal. I'm glad you went into the details on that, because when the law came out, the only way that really, when you interpreted it, that somebody else had to do it, is a third party that had to destroy it. So I'm glad that USDA changed that, and that was from all the comments that got sent in for everybody, so that now the farmer themselves can destroy that crop without paying a third party to do that. So you're talking about legal description. So the GPS is pretty damn accurate, but now they want us to have the southwest quarter of the northeast quarter of, yeah, really.
Yep.
Will an address do, or has it got to be the southwest
Legal
quarter of the?
Yep. Yep.
Can't you normally you can get that from the county, from their website typically, by looking up your you'll find your address, it'll find your I think you can get all that online.
Yeah, you can, but you know something, if you got a GPS coordinates, how more exact can you get than that, you know? But all right, whatever they need to have done there. For USDA certification, FSA, the Farm Service Agency office, I'll give you a little bit of background on that. I worked there for 27 years. So again, Gina said it's not necessary for this year. However, as I mentioned earlier in the program about this new USDA assistance program coming out, you do need to register with the office. It's not a large deal to do it. It does take a little bit of time. You've got to, right now, you would probably do most of this. You could do right over the internet and talk to them. It's pretty simple to set up. The hardest form is there's the form that you certify that your income is less than $900,000 a year. For most of us, that's a pretty easy form to fill out. And so it's really not too bad. I'm going to encourage the guys that I'm doing consulting with this year, I'm going to make sure that they do get their farms in there and certify. You get a nice little map from the office that shows your property, so you get a little benefit that way from it. So not a big deal. And again, like Gina said, not this year, but next year. But if you've got time, I would do it this year just to do it and have that taken care of. Time for the inspections, Gina. So will these inspections mostly happen, you think, during the end or near the harvest season, or will you be doing inspections throughout the year, do you think?
It could very likely be throughout the year. This is a team of staff that have other responsibilities that they need to be doing. Each has a different time period. So they're going to have to figure out all of that timing as they do their workload planning conversations, because they'll have nurseries to inspect, they'll have lots of other inspections to do. So just like every other assignment that they have, these will be inserted when and where they have time, when and where they're in a certain area doing other work. So it could very well be any time of the year, but likely with more emphasis, obviously, when things are growing, so that we can make sure that, verify where hemp is being grown, verify that signage is being placed properly, those sorts of things. And, complaints can happen, though they typically happen, obviously, during the growing season. So that would be another reason why, we would more likely be out there visiting during the growing season than we would be maybe in the winter, not in the winter time, for example.
And how will MDART notify the growers if they're going to have an inspection?
We haven't worked out all of those details yet. With some of our regulatory programs, we provide notice. Sometimes we don't. Obviously, some of these growing areas are going to be areas where a resident might not be, so there is going to have to be some coordination and scheduling. That will be left to the discretion of the actual inspector who covers the particular area where the grower is, to actually have that coordination.
Question came in here. Are you going to be, so if we're going to do an inspection, let's say it's earlier in the year, before the growing or before the crops mature, are you going to do testing while you're out there, or is it going to be more of a visual inspection to make sure that we're not planting other crops in there?
It would probably more be visual, you know, looking at records, looking at the premises, looking at signage, looking at all of the things that are required in the law that need to be observed. You know, we always have the right to grab a sample if we feel like we need to. You know, that's not, and that could be done for various reasons, but you know, I would envision that you know, it could happen any time of the year. We're going to focus on the things that are required by the law, unless there's some allegation or whatever that we're needing to gather facts to either confirm or, you know, dispute. So it could just be a combination of things, and we won't know, you know, it's going to be a year before we get into a regular groove of these. So the frequency, the numbers that we do, you know, that's all going to have to be factored in with all of the other work that that division has on their plates.
Okay.
Could I ask a quick question? Do you know how many hemp growing licenses have been issued so far this year?
I do. Currently, we've issued 486 grower registrations and 425 processor handler licenses. Those growers have identified 736 outdoor growing locations over 12,000 acres, as well as 335 indoor locations, and that's a big number, over 10 million square feet of indoor growing. And the thing about those license numbers is there's at least 150 plus that are still in pending status. And so that means a grower has submitted something or a processor has submitted their application and something is missing, whether or not there are outstanding sample fees from the 2019 season, or they forgot to sign something, or they didn't include maps, whatever the case is. And for those that have some sort of a deficiency, Denise McGill would have sent those applicants an email. So again, you know, the importance of making sure you're paying attention to the email that you put on your grower application. I can't emphasize that enough, because they're going to just, those applications are going to just sit in a pending file because ball's in your court. You need to provide something that was deficient. So with 150 plus pending, added to what we've currently issued, you know, that gets us pretty darn close to what we had in 2019 as far as actual licenses that were issued. So
yeah,
I
that would
think
be
that's
my next question, is how does it compare to last year? So
yeah, in 2019 we issued 603 grower registrations and 487 processor handler licenses.
Huh.
So you know, 486 plus however many that are still pending gets us pretty darn close to that 600 number. So again, check your email box, look for messages from Denise, and make sure you're responding to those requests in a timely manner, because ball's in your court, basically.
Now, Gina, the furloughs or the Fridays off, you know, through July, is it? How's that affecting your program?
I don't know yet. I just saw that email yesterday, actually.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise, I hear.
Yeah, so for 2020, for the 2020 growing season, you got me. I will be required, I think, to take an unpaid day off every other pay period, sorry. So that's that. Denise, I don't know what the requirements are going to be for, I mean, you know, there are different levels of state employees and the requirements change depending on different levels. I know Denise just returned from a 10-day temporary layoff. So she's back on the clock now, which is good. But yeah, it's crazy times right now, and there's a pretty significant budget shortfall that needs to be resolved. And, you know, as always, MDARD will do our part in terms of helping to resolve that budget crisis, and at the same time, you know, do the great work that we do and as best we can.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have a couple more, if I can, go back to where I was. I mean, we talked about who's growing, where they're growing it. We talked about inspections, sampling and testing, and disposal. The last three areas, I just want to make sure I cover. Our hemp plan and our law has to give us authority for enforcement procedures. And that's where I had alluded to this early on, is that the requirement for background checks is going to continue. However, come 2021, we're not going to be able to use that iChat tool anymore. And the reason for that is because our background checks need to be able to identify state and felony convictions related to controlled substances. And that's not just Michigan violations, but any state. So the iChat tool is specific to Michigan law enforcement and not the whole country and not federal. So we're going to have to identify a different tool for those background checks. I've been told there's an FBI tool that's the most efficient and most cost effective. I don't know a lot about it. I do believe there's a fingerprint card that will be required. And so the take home message with that is that, again, growers and processors and handlers are going to need to be prepared and recognize that that may take a little bit of time for them to get their background stuff in, and they just need to plan accordingly as they're getting ready to submit license applications.
Let me just ask a question as outsider. So anyone that has any kind of bust along those lines, felony or misdemeanor, would they be prohibited from growing hemp then?
They would be for felony convictions involving a controlled substance in the last 10 years.
Ah, okay.
So there's a 10-year period of time that, the 10 years prior to applying for the grower registration is what we look at, and they would not be able to participate in the program if there were some criminal background on it to that effect.
But let's say if it's a misdemeanor possession charge or something like that, would that then prohibit them as well?
No, the rule and our law specifies felony convictions related to controlled substances. So, if you mooned somebody on the beach back in high school, I don't care.
Wow.
See no evil, hear no evil, no evil.
Well, how often, now, I remember doing the background check for the 2019 license, and then we just renewed our license this year. When's the next time once we have a license, how often do we have to do the background check, go through that process?
It will be every year.
Every year?
It will be every year that you'll have to do that. I believe the interim rules have some 60-day allowance. So if you did a background check and then applied for your license, within 60 days of when you did that, that would be fine. We didn't put that language in the law, so we would likely handle that through policy or something, but it's going to be an annual requirement, because if you got your 2020 license, you could have a felony conviction happen sometime shortly thereafter. So the next time we ask for that information, your summary is going to look different.
Makes sense.
Okay. Last two broad areas: collection of information. The interim rules have lots of requirements for MDARD to actually report information to USDA. We'll have to do that on a monthly basis and an annual basis. And what we'll be reporting is grower status, whether or not they have a valid license, the amount of acreage, and USDA is planning on developing a database, a database that has real-time license information for law enforcement to be able to use to verify hemp licensing. Last big area is the certification of resources. You guys have heard me talk about this many times. The feds are expecting that the department will be able to certify that we have the resources necessary to carry out the requirements of our hemp plan. And absent that certification, they won't approve our plan. So, and if we don't have an approved plan, that means the feds are in the program in the state. So when you hear me talk about resources needed to run this program, the reason why is because if we don't have them, the feds are going to run it. And I don't
Would you
think
run
that
down
there's-
those fees again? Because I think I threw out there's $100 grower license, but it's different next year. Would you run down those fees?
Right. So the grower registration is currently $100 every year. And what's proposed in Senate Bill 850 is a grower registration fee of $1,250. So yes, that's a bit of an increase. I should mention that we have corrected the language that was in the law that also required growers to obtain that processor handler license to sell their harvest. So we've corrected that in draft language. But we are proposing that $1,250 fee for growers, and we're having conversations about processor fees, about possibly adding a registration fee for individuals who are selling propagative material, selling seeds, selling clones, for example. But those discussions are ongoing right now, so we haven't identified what those final fees will be.
Okay.
May I ask why the 12-fold increase in the license? Is it to cover additional costs or what?
To cover the cost of the program.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
but in fairness to Gina, so I paid $14.50 last year because I had the processor handler and the grower's license. So now this is kind of blended in, correct?
I think what you're trying to say is that you're actually paying $200 less than what you've paid for the last 2 years.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. See the bright side of things.
Trying.
But yes, I mean, bottom line, if, right now you got me and no field inspectors are really working on this program. You got Denise, who's spitting out licenses every day she can. And then you've got some lab staff. And
That's it, huh?
pretty much, yeah, pretty much. So we are identifying the resources required to run this program and in terms of staffing, and then beyond that, the revenue needed to support that staff. And that's it. There's nothing extra in there. We're not in the business of making money. It's simply to cover our costs. And so that conversation is ongoing right now with me, with Nathan and our laboratory director, the division director for PPPM, which is the division that has all the field staff that will work on this program, along with those other tasks that they have on their lists. And so I think those are the 7 broad areas. I should mention just a couple of other things. We did insert some other new things in the law based on, I'll just say, lessons learned or housekeeping. Number 1, disclosure of personal information. As most of you know, the current law has language in it that prohibits us from disclosing anything that we receive as part of the licensing process. So so basically that meant that we could not provide lists of growers. We could not provide lists of processors and handlers. And that was important from the standpoint of security, privacy. A lot of growers want it that way. But we did have some issues with the inability to connect growers and processors. So we've got language in the bill that would allow for growers to, on an optional basis or voluntary basis, give us written consent to provide some basic contact information on a list if anybody were to, if any other licensee were to request it. So we're it's going to be very narrow. It would be maybe a name, phone number, or email. Number 1 is all we would provide. And number 2, we would only provide it to other licensees. So you'd have to be another grower to request a list of processors and handlers, or vice versa. We aren't going to provide it to the general public. The other change that we made is that we do need to provide the information to law enforcement when asked. So there is an exemption in there to allow us to disclose information to law enforcement to help them do their jobs. Couple of other things, we are proposing that hemp not be allowed to be grown in a dwelling. Number one, I don't know, I mean, most people don't like strangers in their house. We particularly don't like our inspectors having to go into somebody's house to do an inspection. So no growing hemp in your basements. Number two, we're gonna have the ability or the authority to create and maintain a prohibited variety list. It doesn't say that we have to do that, but in case we need to, down the road, if we discover that we have a variety of hemp that's consistently testing hot, you know, maybe we would put that on that list as a prohibited variety to grow in the state. And that's about it. There's other minor housekeeping things, language changes that are made, you know, to keep the language in a certain style that our Legislative Service Bureau uses. But at a high level, those are really the biggest changes that are in that law. And again, I didn't say this at the very beginning, but Senate Bill 850 will get us in a place where we have the authority to do what the interim final rules require. So it's the federal specific stuff mostly, all things processing and handling, all things marketing. None of that is included in this draft, in this bill. That will all be discussed further and will come in a second wave of legislative activity where we'll look at all things processing and identify what changes we might need to make related to processing. The rules are specific to growing. So think of it in terms of USDA only really is caring about everything up until the point where compliant hemp is harvested within 15 days of that test date. So, so it's nothing in 850 related to processing and handling.
Yeah, and as Senator Lauer pointed out, you know, the processors are able to totally remediate any THC out of the oil. So there's, yeah, that'd be good to have a little more clarity on that.
Gina, do you need that 850 passed in any time frame before you submit the USDA plan or not?
Say that one more time, Blaine.
Do you need to have 850 passed and approved in Michigan before you submit the USDA plan, the plan to USDA?
That's not super easy to answer, Blaine. Number one is because, I mean, it kind of all goes back to, you know, we have to be able to certify that we have the resources. And obviously the only way we can do that is if we know exactly what the revenue the program is going to bring in. So with the exception of that, knowing what the actual fee revenue is going to be for this program, you know, I think a lot of this, I think the feds would be willing to approve a plan on all of these other areas. And I've actually started building, I mean, it's actually, I have a draft finished, but it's based off of the language in this current bill. Just sitting there on hold now, waiting. So I think technically they would be willing to approve parts of the plan in advance of having legislation finalized. And, you know, they actually have encouraged us to provide copies of draft laws in advance, to provide copies of draft hemp plans in advance, so that at the very end, when they're final, then they'll be able to turn those around quicker. So, you know, they've seen a copy of our draft 850 already. I have not shared a copy of the draft hemp plan with them yet, but the more they see it, the more assistance we'll get from them in a timely manner, so that when everything is finalized, you know, we'll be able to send it right off to USDA, and what I've heard is they're taking 30 days or less to approve plans right now.
Good, all right. But just to be safe, we definitely need to have it in by October, so that'd be September 1st, end of August, probably, given that 60 days.
Yeah, sooner than that, actually. We need to have the law finished sooner than that as it relates to the testing standards. Because as if you recall, we created emergency rules. We use the emergency rules process to identify our testing standards. Those emergency rules will expire mid-August, or is it June? Mid-August, I think. So we need to have things done much sooner than even that 60-day window.
Okay. All right.
All right, so we only have a few minutes left. Some more questions you guys want to get to?
I don't see any new questions. I do have a couple items I'd like to share.
Okay.
So, a couple things. We're raising money to purchase hemp face masks. And let's see. So I wanted, if you go to iHemp Michigan, the iHemp Hour, you can see Lane's lovely picture and a hemp face mask. See, now that's exciting, right? So what I've changed this up. We have a Ono out of Colorado makes hemp t-shirts. So we have a hemp t-shirt with the $75 donation. We'll match your donation and we'll send you one of these cool hemp t-shirts and that'll pay for 5 face masks. So we're trying to raise enough money to purchase a couple hundred of these hemp face masks to give to the state of Michigan for their purposes. So I wanted to touch on that. So you can find that on the iHemp Michigan website under events to the iHemp Hour. Also, we have some hemp events coming up, and you can find that on our classified section of our website. The Hemp Industry Daily has a show. Let me see, I should have opened this up. So the Hemp Industry Daily has an event coming up the end of June, June 29th through July 1st. And NOCO is hosting a summer solstice event. And that is, I need to fix that. That is
June 16th and through the 19th, Dave, I think.
Exactly. So, and for those of you who haven't perused our website yet, a couple things I want to point out. Under membership, there's business members. So one of the problems we had in 2019 is the inability for Department of Ag to share lists of resources with people. So we have this business membership. So there's a couple hundred people here, and they're organized by categories, so you can find what you need when you need it, by looking at this. And then we also have a hemp map. So if I don't have specific locations on this map, but if you're looking for what's going on in your area, you can use this map to find other hemp growers and business services in your area. So all that's on iHempMichigan.com. Yeah, and I'll see if I can find that. Oh, stop share. There we go. Let's see, so we talked about masks, we talked about events. Is there anything else we're leaving off?
Melissa has a question. Where can I locate the rules testing standards for 2020 harvesting season when submitting to MDART?
So the best place to go is to just go to MDART's Industrial Hemp website. So michigan.gov/industrial hemp, no space. We've got lots of information there under forms and resources that would include the testing procedures, the actual applications that can be downloaded, copies of the research agreement. We're adding stuff to that as we can. And if there are people on the call today that are not licensed yet are in the background trying to decide if they are going to get licensed in the program, at that same website, you can click on a link to self-subscribe to a listserv that we maintain and that we use to send out program updates, regulatory reminders, those sorts of things.
Excellent.
About hemp masks, about getting them. Right now, our main goal was to get these in so we could get them to MDART because you know, everybody's helping the first responders, and MDART has a lot of tasks when they have to still go in and do things. We're working on a process that we can do that. You can buy these hemp masks, but we just don't have that in place right now. We wanted to get the first thing done first, and then we'll look at that. So we will try to make them available. We just got to work on that process to do that. So. All right, so I'm going to sign off right now. Go in my other webinar that I'm going to do. Gina, again, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And,
thank you, Senator Lauer, for participating. And
all right, thanks, everyone. Have a good planting season.
Yes, there we go. And hemp on. So yeah, thank you for participating in the iHemp Hour.